Hi, welcome to lecture number 2 for analyzing a chess position, and in this lecture I want to cover tactics and material. So the first thing you want to do in a position is see if there's any available tactics. This is one of the reasons why we should be studying tactical puzzles, because it will allow us to win material or to checkmate the king. And usually the side that has more material is the side that will generally win the game. So, and it's hard to say, how do you find a tactic? Well, that's why we do puzzles once again. But just sort of a tip on having you analyze for tactics during a game, because when you solve the tactical puzzles and they say white, or black to checkmate in 2, or use a pin to win a piece, well, and during a real game there's no one telling you what tactic to use or how many moves it is to mate. You have to figure that all out. So one of the tips for winning material is looking for unguarded pieces. So in this position it's black to move, and one of the things I do is I look for unguarded or under-defended pieces. And in white's position, since it's black to move, I see 2 unguarded pieces, the bishop and the knight. And there's actually 2 undefended pawns here too. But basically, black may have a tactic which can win one of these pieces, and it does. If black moves queen to a5, black attacks the bishop and the knight at the same time, and there's no move that white can make to save both pieces. So if you think about it, possibly the white could always maybe move the knight and protect the bishop, or maybe white could move the bishop and defend the knight. But in this case, there is no move from either piece which can save the other piece. So white is going to lose a piece. So that's my short thing on tactics, is you just have to look for them and solve it. And the best way to learn how to do tactics is by doing a ton of puzzles. So now what about material? Well, by material, I mean the material count. So let's look at the position on the board. So we need to look at how many pieces more and of what type we have than our opponent. So the easiest way is to pair off the pieces. So each of us have a king, obviously. Each of us have a rook. Each of us have a queen. Each of us have a knight. Each of us have a bishop. Well, maybe I should take it back one move. And then the pawns. Black has 6 pawns and white has 7 pawns. So actually white is up 1 pawn. There is another way to do this, though. Basically, the generally accepted method or way of looking at things is we translate the pieces into a point value, and then we can see how many points we're up. Where pawns are worth 1, knights and bishops are worth 3, rooks are worth 5, the queen is worth 9, and the king is worth question mark. It's actually, if you lose the king, you lose the game. But just so you know, when we get the king safety, a lot of times we'll put a point value on the king of 3.5 for defense. So what we could do is we could actually go back through this position, find out that we're 1 pawn up, and that could be 2 points. 1 point, I'm sorry. But this system can also be used for what happens if you've, if one side had, maybe white did not have the rook and black did not have the bishop. Well, in that case, when we paired everything off, then white would be up. White would be down, black would be up a point. Why? Well, we know in this position that if we looked at everything's being equal, if we just looked at the bishop versus the rook is worth 2 more points than the bishop. So theoretically, but that's 2 points, but we already know white is up a pawn, which is 1 point, so black would actually be up 1 point or 1 pawn in this position technically. Even though a lot of people start to assign or look at the quality of the pieces, but we're going to get into that. So, but for me, it's simply what pieces do I have more than my opponent? Am I pawn? Do I have a pawn more, or have I won the exchange, which means you get a rook for a bishop or a knight, things like that. I usually look at it in terms of I have a bishop and a pawn for my opponent's rook. So that's how I usually look at things. And I want to say that one of the reasons I look at it this way is because I call it the force count, or maybe Jeremy Silman used that term. But if you think about it, a piece can only attack one square one time, or a piece one time. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about. Like, let's say this square here, here, maybe I'll highlight a different color. Here black has the queen and the pawn. Now we know the queen is much more valuable than the pawn, but each piece can only really attack another piece or a square one time. So, and in this case, here the knight and the bishop are attacking this square. Now this usually have to do with attacking pieces or pawns, but maybe just to say a piece can only ever attack a certain square piece one time. So I know in my tactics I talked about superior force, where you can win a piece or a pawn. You have to, if you attack it 4 times and your opponent only defends it 3 times, you can win that piece or pawn, even though the pieces all may be different. Doesn't matter if the piece is a rook, or a queen, or a knight, or a bishop. Now sometimes the order of capture does matter, but that's my point, is that a piece can only ever attack something once. So you may be 2 pawns up, but the way you can attack is going to be the same. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense. So I usually look at it in terms of what piece I am versus my opponent's pieces. Even though some people like to get very much in the detail by saying, no, this pawn isn't worth as much. Like if you don't know, in this position, this is an isolated pawn, and people would say, well, it's true. This isolated pawn is probably not worth the full potential of the pawn. But what you're doing is you're starting to analyze the positional elements. But to me, that's getting into maybe looking at the position, and maybe also looking at the plan. So I think the tactic and the material thing is very straightforward to most people, so that's why I'm not spending too long on it. I'm going to move on to the next lecture where I start to cover other various elements.